So we are officially recording. We'll all have like chances to interact and kind of give each other updates. The first part I wanted to see or check in with you all on was a couple of updates. One thing I wanted to tell you all is it seems like Olivia and I are going to be doing an interview with Pine Copper Lime next week. We don't know when it's going to come out. We're not going to promote it yet, but I'm really hopeful that because of that, we'll get our mission statement done today. Because I think that'll help us with that forward-facing, united kind of front. And then I think, so I just wanted to let you know that. Does anybody have any new like scheduling issues going on? I know Chelsea, you said that you were going to have a little bit more going on.
Yeah, we have grad reviews coming up. We have like a mini mester, so we get off at Thanksgiving though. So basically from Thanksgiving until January, I'm working on my thesis, but I'm out of school.
Okay. So. That's pretty much the same that my school is going to be doing. I think like the 20th is maybe the latest that I'll be in class, and then I'll be grading that next week. So
yeah. I just have to put in my grades, and then I'm pretty much done with anybody else's agenda for the rest of the semester.
Okay. My big scheduling issue lately has been that we're moving, but we're not really moving. So my mother-in-law rents an upstairs space, and so we've been moving things up here, and that started to kind of chip into the weekends, but I should be done with that, not this weekend, but the next weekend. So I should be able to put more time in around then. And then Annie, is there anything changing for you?
Nope, pretty much all my classes I'm teaching remotely, so none of that's, our semester's going until the first week of December, but again, it's all remote, so.
Okay.
Yep.
And then I know you're doing MAPC as the vice president, but that won't start until next year, technically?
Probably not. I imagine what's going to be happening is at some point, because they decided the current president, like the old president and VP, will actually stay on as advisors.
Okay.
So I'm assuming there's going to be a bit of a transition, and yeah, then I'll probably get a little crazy at the beginning of next year. So.
Okay, cool. So just let us know at any point if you're like, oh, overwhelmed, can't do it. We're not going to be like, how dare you? And then the other thing that I wanted to check in with is if either of you would feel comfortable kind of keeping time. We should get out of here at 5-ish. We have a lot to talk about, so there's a part of me that's like we might start really running in. So if either of you wouldn't mind just reminding us when we get to halfway through, so at 4, and then 30 minutes till, and then 5 minutes till, or both, either way. I'm very bad at time, so I'm just gonna and then the next thing I wanted to do, actually first, have either of you learned anything new about the nonprofit kind of structuring or scheduling?
No, nothing. I mean, because again, I did look over that information packet from that website, but it's not any different than what I already knew. So.
Okay. And that kind of brings me to the next thing I want to do. I just want to do like a brief breeze through so we're all oriented towards that as we go into the meeting. Because part of what we are going to be doing today does involve scheduling out some sections of, scheduling out like the activities. And they do have like a laid out, first you need this, then you need this, then you need that kind of a list. So I want to go over that. Would it be easier for y'all if we all pulled it up separately, or if I shared my screen?
Screen sharing.
Yeah, screen share.
Let me go ahead and do that. I already had it open. So I have some highlighting going on too for places that I wanted to review. This is the first page, which is just this isn't technically legal advice. Don't sue us, blah, blah, blah.
I love how they're like, if there's any other way you cannot be a nonprofit, that would be great.
They're like, listen, this is hard if there's something that already exists that is doing what you're doing, then that's fine. And I, Olivia and I talked about that, and we were like, there are other organizations that do some of the things we're trying to do, but they don't have the same mission statement that we are planning on having, if you kind of can think about it that way. They don't have the
Mhm.
same structure either. So the alternatives, like, are you sure though? Again,
It's always a good question to ask. There's a lot of people that don't realize how much bloat there is in the nonprofit industry.
yeah. And I'm aware that it's going to be a big, big thing, which is also part of why I want this transparency to happen, because if anybody else is like, I could do this better, or there's something I want to change, it shows them kind of the structuring and how we put it together, which I think would be really helpful, even if you're not a part of our, membership. So again, is our nonprofit needed? My personal opinion is yes. The next first step is really the board of directors. And I think that is something we're going to have to talk to all volunteer members about before we start putting anything together. But that might be the first thing that I don't know, I'm torn. Do you guys think it should be the board of directors or the mission statement first for people to vote on?
Well, it depends, since it's a little different. I can see they only require one board member. Best practice is to have fewer, or 5 or 7. So you can incorporate with one and then hold elections after people are a little more sure of what the organization is. If you start with the mission statement first, or you start with the board first and then the board helps put together the mission statement. It's
That's
I
a
guess
good
whichever
point.
one you want it to guide.
Yeah. I was going to say it depends if we really think the mission statement is going to help with the creation selection of the board, that it seems like that should be something that gets voted on first. But yeah,
Yeah. I think that's a good point, because so board members should be elected regardless. So we will have to hold an election for that. And I think it would be better if we have a general concept of what we're hoping those board members can do or help us with as far as the mission statement. Because I kind of got into the nitty gritty details of what they're describing board of directors being able to do and what they're kind of responsible for and things like that. And the board of directors is responsible for upholding written documentation. And so I do think probably the mission statement would be the thing to say, this is what we're going to do. And we're going to hold you guys to it once we elect you. So you guys are probably right. It might be better to do mission statement first. Y'all are probably right. I'm trying to get guys out of my vocabulary. Sorry. It's not going well, but I'm hoping, so I think we'll do mission statement first. And then we'll have a full vote on that. And then maybe my biggest question, I think, with the board of directors is whether or not we want to do like an interim director, which Olivia and I have both been like, we don't mind being the interim directors, and then we hold an election next year, And I did check later on down the line, and it does say that we can have a minimum number of a minimum number of directors, basically, and a maximum written into our bylaws so that it can flux,
That's a great idea.
Yeah, but I want to make sure that everybody's into that. So I think what I'm going to say is maybe we do mission statement today and like flesh it out, over a period of time. And then our next volunteer meeting, we talk about, okay, do we want to do interim directors? And then do we want to elect new people, or do we want to just go straight for board of directors and hold elections? don't know. What do you two think about that?
I think there, to me, it makes more sense to have a little bit of interim leadership, because this is a new thing, and essentially to kind of be able to really organize getting stuff done, getting it started, there needs to be leadership. And I think waiting on that again will kind of stall out the initial incorporation process. And I think as long as the goal is like, look, this is just kind of being established to essentially carry on the duties of getting, this guild solidified in concrete. And then, once we're more established, later on in the year, however you want to phrase that, we can then kind of have that election, that more like initial open election.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and it
I think
also gives us time to get to know the people who are running for officer positions, because I do have like an idea of a lot of the people here from being in other organizations with them, but voting is sometimes a little bit of like a popularity contest, and I'm like, I don't know any of y'all yet.
Yeah, yeah. And I also think it's like I'm very aware that I'm not a person that people are like, I recognize you. I mean, me and Chelsea know each other,
Yeah.
but I hadn't met Annie before.
Mhm.
It's that kind of thing where it's just like, it's really nice to have all these people, but also, yeah, I agree with you. I do think that that will slow it down, and I'm worried that I'm of two minds, where there's the part of me that really wants us to give people the opportunity to vote on every aspect, right? I really do want to be by the people, for the people, to be,
Yeah.
a little corny there. But then there's also the part of me that's like, yeah, but we're not going to meet that January, February deadline if we keep stalling for
And
approval.
they'll vote on you eventually.
That's
Um,
true. Yeah.
They
So
can,
maybe,
if they don't like you, they vote you out. They have an option at some point, definitely.
yeah, that's exactly right. Okay. So I think maybe that's what we will do, is go ahead with do we all three feel comfortable with that idea of just saying, let's go ahead and do
Interim
interim
directors.
directors? Okay.
And I think this is great, like recording everything, archiving it, and then as long as people know that this is available, like you can see how this organization started, the inception of it. And, then of course they can become more well informed. And then if they do have issues when there is an election, then, they can make their
Yeah.
choice then. I feel like at this point, trying to give people a choice is going to be a bit hard, because it's so new. Like, how do
Mhm.
people know if they really want to serve and what that would mean
Yeah.
until, there's really something to give them an example of what that looks like.
Yeah, and especially because we don't have bylaws to kind of describe what the board of directors are versus the regional representatives, which is a whole other conversation we'll need to have later.
Yeah,
But,
you may,
that is an important distinction for people, is like, okay, but what capacity am I in? What leadership role am I in? Because I don't mind being a board member at this point, but in the future, I don't want to be,
right, you might find that you're more suited for like a different position in the organization, like even things that are non-board member, like an executive director.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think, yeah, let's go with that. Do you think that just 2 interim directors is enough, or should we do 3?
I would say 2. I would be afraid that 3 is too many cooks in the kitchen.
Okay. Okay.
It's my opinion.
Let me see. Annie was nodding too.
Yes. Sorry.
It's okay.
I keep forgetting like body language isn't as effective for Zoom.
You're all right. So I think 2 interim directors, and that will mean, my only hesitation with that is we would need to write our bylaws in a way that says the minimum number of board of directors would be 2, and then the maximum would be like 5 or whatever number. I don't know. I can, like, it's fine for right now for it to just be 2 people, but I worry that in the future, just having 2 and being like, whatever, we only have 2 people will cause complications, specifically because there's a clause in here about conflict of interest where the majority of non-conflicting board members have to approve the other person. And I'd rather have 2 people vote on that than just one person be like, yeah, I don't care. You know, and that's kind of a later on down the line issue.
That could definitely be, just look into the process for amending your bylaws. And like, I'm pretty sure you get to write how you amend your own bylaws.
Mhm,
Because that would be like at this point in time, we would like to review our bylaws and make sure it works for the size of our organization.
mhm.
And that would be something that I'd put at like the top of that list today. Like, I'm worried about it being 2 people at the minimum, and I'd like to raise that minimum to 3 or 4 whenever we have like more organizational stability.
Okay.
Yeah, I think again, and it's somewhere in there, as long as you just say at, at any given time, members of the organization can raise the amendment of the bylaws. Like we can, at an annual meeting or however often, we want to have like members meetings and things like that. So I think as long as it's something that happens at a meeting and does get, obviously passed by the majority of a vote.
Mhm.
So
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah,
Maxi just amended their bylaws at this last meeting, so.
yeah, that's a good point. I do think it should be I think it should be easy for the membership to amend the bylaws. That's really, I think, my logic. Um, because I think we are gonna need that built in. And also, I think it's just a good idea, especially when we're investing so much time and energy in our transparency, you know?
And I mean,
Um,
that can be part of the mission, right? Is that this is an organization that lives and breathes with the membership. So it does need to be able to flex and grow and accommodate its members. And so it needs to be more of a malleable organization than one that is set upon with, rules and concrete and tradition and things like that.
yeah. Yeah, that's a very good point, especially when you have, like, when we look at the way that certain organizations have really suffered in the face of coronavirus, because they can't adapt
Mhm.
at, the drop of a hat. I think that's a very, very good point. Being able to make that kind of flexibility and making that part of our mission statement from the get-go.
And it's the biggest strength of a small organization. It's the biggest strength of a small nonprofit that they have that level of resilience.
Yeah.
It's the best reason to incorporate
Yes.
out of any of them, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so that helps me kind of settle that question. We'll do mission statement first, board of directors second. But we know that there will be 2 people. It will likely be me and Olivia for interim, and then we will start to kind of settle that out later. And then we have the actual steps kind of laid out. So maybe what we'll do for the interim directors before we move on is we'll put like a time limit on it, and it'll be in it like a perfunctory kind of limited time. So it'll be like 6 months or something like that.
After 6 months, we'll call a vote.
Yeah.
We'll hold an election.
Sounds good.
And then maybe at that 6-month period, that will also be when we hold elections for all other positions. And that would put us out to October. We're in the 10th month. That would put us out to the 4th month, which I can't remember the name of. That's real sad.
April?
April. Thank you.
Mm.
So that would put us out to April, which would actually line up really well with our schedule, considering we have all of this other stuff that we're still kind of fleshing out. Okay. We could also, if there's any concerns about that, we could also say, well, what if we do time served? And that'll leave us at, we started doing this in July, so that would leave us in like February, Okay, so that's really helpful and settled. Thank you. it's very nice to have other people to talk to instead of just going, okay, what do we do? So the next steps would be to incorporate by filing articles of incorporation. I do think they've laid this out really streamlined in a way that we can pretty much follow. There are a couple of things on this that I still have some questions about on whether or not we'll need to do them, which some of them will just need to find a lawyer and ask them. Some of them will need to find an accountant and ask them. But I do know we can do this on our own, the incorporation with our files of incorporation, which is our bylaws, basically. So that will be our next big thing to worry about is bylaws. And we can talk a little bit about how to section those, but we don't have any, other than me, we don't have any representatives from that group here right now. So I don't want to put too many words in their mouth, but I do want to give them an idea of where to start. So we'll do our file of our articles of incorporation, then applying for tax exempt status. Again, bylaws need to happen first. So that would probably be our fourth thing, I think. And again, we'll need to ask like a lawyer, do we have to wait until our tax exempt status happens in order to apply for grants, et cetera? But I don't think we do, because we wait until January to start accepting membership, our taxes won't be due until the following, tax period.
Yeah.
So there's a part of me that's like, we will buy ourselves time. We will buy ourselves time if we just kind of kick that down the pipeline a bit. And then of course we need to do an employer identification number, even if we don't have employees, which we will, in the loosest sense, have contract employees if we're going to plan on doing the honorarium. Pumpkin, come here. It's okay, come here. Sorry.
Okay.
He's not coming here. That's fine. So we won't really have actual employees, but we will have hopefully tax exempt status, which is going to kind of change all of that. We'll still need the EIN. I don't think we're going to need, I'm not expecting in our first year for our annual gross receipts to go past 50,000. I'm really not.
No.
Yeah.
That would take a while.
Yeah. It would take a good period of time with us not spending money on anything,
It'd be very impressive.
Yes.
I mean, maybe if we were at the stage, when we're at the stage of like, if we actually have a physical conference or something like that, perhaps.
Yes, exactly.
But that would be the only situation when I could see any of that happening.
Yeah. This is the part where I'm a little bit concerned, is the total assets of 20, like, I know, 250,000 or less. The only reason I'm concerned about that is because of the pay your own, or kind of determine your own payment. If we're accepting people's prints and they're valuing their prints really highly, that could cause them problems for us. What is wrong with you? Stop.
You can ask them for prints in a certain range, like literally, like we would like prints that are valued at less than $100, less than $50 that you would personally, because the donor sets the value of their in-kind donation. So you can give them like a pretty solid reason, like we don't want to go over this threshold of assets. And so we're asking for donations that are, because we don't want your membership fee to be, $2,500 because you're the greatest printmaker in the world and you sell really well.
Exactly. Like send us something small, like $50.
I was about to say, giving them a price range of what the membership might be worth, and then saying for an in-kind donation of prints in that price range, right? Because that would keep people from giving us prints they value at like $1,200, because obviously we're not asking you for a $1,200 membership.
Yeah.
So.
And will we ask them for documentation of that value? Because I think that's probably the best way to go about doing that, when we aren't necessarily planning on like a fundraiser within the year, you know?
I guess where would that document come from? Where would
That's
that
what I'm
documentation?
wondering. Would they
Yeah.
tell us, or because I think it's SGC who, like, whenever you send off prints to a show, they give you an insurance form,
Mhm.
but that's kind of a different thing. So I don't know if we would need to come up with a form.
I think it depends on, and this was kind of a question I had, and I didn't want to sidetrack us, but it seems like we're kind of going that way, is what do we intend to do with these prints? Like, I know we want to give people the option of paying in a way that's accessible, and for printmakers, that would be donating work, but then are we turning it into an archive? If it's an archive, how does it become accessible? And I think that's where then we need to get into the question of insurance, because that's why SGC has you fill out that insurance form, is because they're archiving it. It's going into their, a physical place that, then as membership you could have access to. And so they
Yeah,
need to have
I
an
think,
insurance for it.
yeah, I think what we talked about in the interest meeting, so like the public idea of what we would be doing is that we would be using them for fundraisers eventually. What makes me nervous is like, how do we claim them on our taxes when we can't determine their value until they go to auction? You know what I mean? That's
They
where,
will just have to tell you, like, this
yeah,
is what this is about. This is what I'm valuing my donation at.
yeah,
I think as long as there's some way that we could get essentially like a receipt, like as long as we have that somewhere that says we collected this print that was worth this much. And I don't think it necessarily matters like how that worth, the worth is determined by the artist. So I think as long as we have a receipt, we should be fine.
yeah. And we are telling them the in-kind donation. So if somebody forgets to give us a receipt and we're like, we have to do our taxes right now, we could always
There's
say
always
it's based on our in-kind.
I mean, have we thought about having like a Google form that people just fill out whenever they do
Yeah.
that? Because that would just be the best way to capture that information, and then that could act as our receipt.
Yeah, I think that's probably what we are planning on doing. Similar to them like joining the mailing list. I want it to be the only part that I get a little bit wiggly on as far as my concept of it is how they would be sending us some funds. Like, do we have a Google form where we add in a PayPal? How do we do that, you know?
Need your EIN first.
What? I'm sorry.
You need your EIN first, too.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Oh yeah.
Before we can have any kind of bank account for the organization.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
found this document to be like super helpful because there's like certain parts of it that I'm like, okay, that's what has to happen first. And then, so essentially what we'll have to do is tax exempt and then the EIN. And then we would go, kind of going back to this. I don't know if I left anything unresolved. I'm sorry. I just kind of hopped back into here. But next we would apply for that tax exempt status as a 501c3, which is a specific form, 1023. They strongly recommend we have an attorney for that part, or a CPA. And an accountant or a CPA, which I think is a good idea. And that's part of my kind of pressure. But it does make me feel better that we might not necessarily need an attorney to be contracted to us just to do our bylaws. I'm feeling a lot more solid about that at this moment because of they've given us the exemplary, like the example, and also the language that's here doesn't necessarily say anything other than have a lawyer review them before they're finalized, just have them check.
Yeah.
That's very different from what I've been trying to do, which is like find a lawyer to ask questions. I think it's probably going to be easier for us to just be like, bam, 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 here's our bylaws. Are these legal? And then, if not, how should we change the wording? And then we'll also have to have that initial meeting of the board of directors to officially adopt the bylaws, going back up here. But the way that we've kind of laid this out is in accordance with that. Then, of course, the gross receipts, we talked about that already. That just changes which tax form we file, or which nonprofit tax exempt status form we file. And then after we get that, we would kind of apply for exemption from state corporate income tax and franchise tax. I'm not sure if we would, well, I guess technically if we're having fundraisers, we would need the franchise tax. So, okay. We do have to have workers' compensation. This is something I'm not entirely sure about. I think I need to talk to a lawyer about this specific part, because they're saying something very specific. The 3 full or part-time employees and or corporate officers, including uncompensated board members or officers, that we're not going to hit that this year because we only have the 2 interim directors.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we determine the full part-time, who technically counts as an employee? Is it just the board of directors? Is it, so we're going to need to know when we'll have to actually purchase that and how we're going to pay for it.
Does there need to be a physical location listed?
That's another question that I have. I don't know. I'm not really
Usually,
sure.
Yeah, my gut says there needs to be some sort of mailing address, and that, needs to be the physical location, but yeah.
I think that has to do with the fact that the IRS literally sends you a letter, though.
Yep.
Like literally will send you a letter.
Okay.
So like one of my professors runs a nonprofit that's completely online. And so his house is the mailing address for the IRS.
Okay. And they're not like,
They need to contact him by mail,
okay. So it could be like a board member's home.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. That helps a lot, because I was like, because there's the local property tax exemption, which involves property. And I was like, I don't want to apply for this.
Yeah.
Because we're not going to have a physical space that we're renting at this point.
You'll really never need that.
Yeah. So then blah, 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 unemployment taxes. This is all stuff. This section, where is it? I would say honestly, right about here onward, I think we can parse out later.
Mm-hmm.
I also think around this area, well, maybe a little bit lower, right about here, is when we would probably want to start talking to a lawyer more directly, because I think we can hold on to our bylaws and our files of incorporation and stuff, and then just have it all get checked before we turn it in. And then create a working relationship after this point. Yeah.
So my parents are accountants.
Oh.
So my dad actually teaches accounting. And I'm gonna ask. I know his specialty is not nonprofits, but I'll ask around if he knows of someone, like someone else in his college or whatever deals with nonprofits or has a connection, because I think it would be nice to have definitely somebody look at some of the forms that are going to go along with this, in terms of like, especially when we want to start getting that, like, what is it? What we need to be able to have fundraisers and things like that. What is solicitation?
Yes.
Yeah, letter of charitable solicitation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, our license for that. Yeah. Which is down here, and that's our last task.
Yeah.
And of course, I think for us all that would be fantastic, by the way, Annie. I would really appreciate that, because I'm having a very hard time finding people.
Oh, I just think it's hilarious that like I have a twin sister, and none of us are doing anything remotely close to what our parents are doing, and I was just like, it's actually useful to have parents who are accountants.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, my grandpa started his own LLC, and so I told him about this, and he was like, he wrote down the name of it, and he was like, I'm gonna look it up later, and I was just like, oh my gosh, it's not real yet, but thank you. So this sort of stuff we can, I think, return to later. It's good for us to have it like in our consciousness, but
Yeah.
it's stuff that we can return to after we get all these other really big portions sectioned out.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we have our ongoing legal requirements. I do think these are going to be important for us to keep in mind as we're putting together the bylaws, the board of directors, et cetera, and what their roles and responsibilities are going to be versus the regional representatives. So reporting to the IRS needs to happen every year. Unsurprisingly, we need to file an e-postcard annually, and then we'll need to renew our charitable solicitation and tax exempt status every year. Collecting sales tax on items sold. So I'm not sure if they will call our fundraiser retail items. I don't necessarily think so. I think what is retail is like t-shirts, not things done in the vein of charity, right? I think those are two separate categories.
Yeah, I think that might be different. I would have to look at like what North Carolina's laws are. So there's this whole thing called unrelated business income tax,
Mhm.
a UBIT. And so if you are selling things and like say your organization like sells t-shirts to raise money, you could potentially be taxed on those t-shirts unless your organization is to like preserve the art and legacy of t-shirts like as your nonprofit mission.
Okay.
So I think like sales tax on items sold and then saying retail items would be something more in line with like that kind of tax.
Okay, so if we started doing like what Tamarind does, where they sell their aprons, right?
Yeah, their aprons, if they would reach over a certain threshold of sale. I don't know what the money is in every state, then they're eligible for UBIT. Like their hats especially would be hard to justify.
Okay.
But yeah, a lot of printmakers and printmaking organizations, especially if their mission involves helping print like remain, like helping it thrive, they typically don't fall under that kind of strict rule.
And so for us, because essentially we'd be collecting this stuff for membership, and then any and all fundraising funds would go back into programs for the membership that would be based on our bylaws, that money
Right.
probably is not.
That would be fundraising.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's going in the charitable solicitation. Got you.
Mhm.
Okay, cool. And then this was my question about the principal office address, but I do think that will probably, and I do want to clarify what a registered agent is with like a lawyer or accountant to know what that actually means. Volunteer myself,
That's
but
a good idea.
like I'm fine with it being my office address or my house. you
It
know?
looks like too, because it says update, it seems like maybe that could change. So it
Yes.
doesn't, 'cause I think that would be important that it's not always your, so that maybe it adapts and changes with the current, board and things like
Yes.
that.
And that's something we'll need to write out in the bylaws so that they know what to do with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And hopefully that doesn't cost money, but we'll, look at that when we get to that kind of issue. And then of course, make sure that we're filing our W4s, et cetera, which again, that's something we'll get into way later when we're talking to an accountant,
It's so funny. They will send you, the North Carolina Department of Labor will send you stuff that says you need to put up the posters.
Mhm.
Because my husband
Mhm.
works from home and he kept getting all those letters and he's like, who am I? He's like, all right, I'll buy one poster and put it up for myself.
Yeah, just so I remember.
It's like, yeah, they don't care that it's like, they don't even check. Like if you have a registered, business or what have you, they'll send it.
Yeah.
It's great. It's hilarious.
Yeah, maybe what we'll do is have them just post it publicly on our website, and then that'll be technically we've got them, And then, of course, they gave us more resources to look at that I think we can look into later. I do think at some point, if we can afford it, it would be great to join the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits. I do think they would really help. But we don't know what our expenses are yet, so I don't know how they would determine our fee. So I think for now, we'll again flip that to that back burner. And maybe ask an accountant if there's a way for us to project annual amounts.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that we can do a couple more things, because I think that's going to become prohibitive the more paperwork that we start really getting into if we don't have a general expectation of how much we'll be making annually. But they would know more about that because they are people with degrees in math. So, so this is the part about the board of directors. Hopefully you both read through this. I think you probably did.
Yeah.
But the big things are making sure that everybody who does become a board member understands these. So I can go over this with Olivia for our interim board membership. But I do really think we should not only make this document publicly available, but I also think we should incorporate some of this information in the bylaws for the board of directors so that they understand exactly what their role and responsibility is. And I think distributing that when we have an election as a reminder and telling them what section of the bylaws they can find that information in is really going to help. Because my biggest issue with not as much with MAPC, but with other organizations, like really big ones like SGCI, for a very long time, I had no idea what it meant to be a board member, at all. I didn't realize that they were on voting positions. There's a lot of minutia that I was like, I don't even know where to begin to find this out. So I think routinely reminding people and saying, this is where it is, it's in this section, that's all you really need to read. Although we do strongly suggest that you also read the rest of this document, because you will be tasked with making sure that the entire organization is following these bylaws.
Yeah. I think whenever the website gets spelled out, having that section on the website, that's organizational procedures,
Yeah.
will be really helpful, because I honestly didn't know half the stuff I know about MAPC until a year ago. And, even with their, they do make it easier to attend meetings and understand what's going on and have a voting say, but even their website, technically I'm supposed to be able to look all this stuff up, and I'm like, where is this?
Yeah.
Who to ask? It's not super obvious either. So I think whenever we have, I think the secretary, whenever we, that position, I think that's the one that has the ability to be able to send all this information, or whatever position we want, that designating somebody kind of over those inquiries and making it super obvious is going to be really important.
Yeah. And I also think it's really important to do that, because I've had personal conversations with people who have been on boards for other organizations who become super disillusioned with participating in institutions because they sign up for something based on the information they could find, and then they get there and they either find out that information is out of date, or they find out that that's not the entirety of the information, or for instance, they might find out that they're in a board position, or not even a board position, but on a committee that doesn't have a vote in the board decisions, in which case they're like, why am I in this situation being super disenfranchised, And I don't want anybody to have that negative experience with us. I want them to feel like they're making a difference for the entirety of the group, and that they're making a difference in the direction that they feel like their strengths lie within. I don't want somebody to become a secretary who actually wants to be the treasurer. That's a very broad statement, but I want it to be as clear as possible. So yeah, definitely the website, and then also just email reminders, and even maybe Instagram. I think redundancy is really going to be the name of the game, especially as we're forming.
Just about 4:00.
Oh, thank you. So the big duties that I want to go over, there's a bunch of information here, but I just want to go over it so that we are all aware. There's liability issues if a board member fails any of these responsibilities, essentially. These fiduciary duties include, and we talked briefly about this before, but they include the duty of care, the duty of loyalty, and the duty of obedience. Duty of care means that you should be attending board meetings. So somebody who can't continually attend board meetings is going to have to, we're probably going to ask them to resign at a certain point, which we'll have to kind of flesh out in the bylaws. You should become informed. I think that's one of those things that's a little bit more idealistic, where it's like, well, how do I demonstrate that you weren't informed? But you should definitely read all information presented to you. I am a firm believer in keeping receipts for every interaction that you have as a company and as an individual. And part of that's just like, my brain's like a little bit broken because I have really bad ADHD, but part of that is also being able to review what you talked about last time and staying on task. So we're gonna have to figure out a way to structure the bylaws to really hone in on that responsibility. This also talks about the fact that you're not expected to be an expert in financial, legal, or operational issues. I'm definitely not. So, but I can rely on information presented to me by somebody that I believe is reliable and competent. Independent judgment, groupthink is bad, period. And of course, monitoring the nonprofit's activities and being a whistleblower if you think that you need to be. I'm going to scroll through a lot of this. There's a lot of really good information here, but we don't necessarily have time to talk about it all. Again, making sure we have receipts is really important. Whistleblowing is also really important. And we're also going to need to write out protections for anyone who is a whistleblower in our bylaws. Monitor for. Yep. Any kind of financial misreporting, undisclosed self-dealing transactions, unauthorized activity, or improper behavior by anybody else working within the organization, including regional representatives. The board is kind of there to make sure people are adhering to those guidelines and make sure it's publicly known if they're not. We are an educational, possibly, organization. I'm not sure how we're going to file ourselves, if we'll be organizational or professional, or I'm not sure if there are specific categories on these forums, I think is what I'm trying to say. But we are allowed to do the following: retain contributed property, include contributed funds in any pooled thing, and then invest all or parts of the funds in any pooled common fund available for investment by another entity. Outside of a bank, I'm not down to do any of that. I think we should also make that very clear that our money is our money and we will be the ones who manage it. But we'll kind of have to think about the language for that in the future.
Yeah, and you'll have to see how things turn out, because I know that this sounds like really abstract at this point, but sometimes people give you gifts of stock and then you just have stock and it generates dividends for you as the organization. And you have to decide, like, well, they gave me stock in Exxon. I don't think I'm okay with that. Like, do I reject this gift? Like, how do we accept or reject if that does become an issue later on down the line?
Yeah, that's a good point. And there are other forms, like somebody, again, super abstract, and I don't know the official term for this, but somebody might like bequeath a certain amount of money to our organization later on.
Bequest when someone, is when someone dies and you're the beneficiary of their will.
Yeah, and I'm, not expecting that, but at the same time, what if it happens? We're going to have to come up with like solutions for that and how we deal with that in the future. So, yeah. Then, of course, there's the delegation of tasks, et cetera, to officers, employees, agents, et cetera. That would be our regional representatives and any committees that we create. Obviously, contracting with the bank and authorizing the payment of reasonable compensation to people for their management services, et cetera. The duty of loyalty, just acting in the best interest of the nonprofit and not for your own advantage. That one's pretty self-explanatory, so I'm not going to bog us down really that much. In the specific, we, for the most part, understand what that means. Opportunities. Right. And also there are specific opportunities that I want to kind of talk about. And I think for this specifically, I'm wondering if board members are able to apply for grants that they will be directly competing with. So let's say specifically, let's say Annie is a board member, right? But you're also on MAPC's board. How would that kind of conflict of interest disclose itself? And how would you proceed if both organizations were applying for the same grant? You know, that's something we're going to have to flesh out in the bylaws, because I don't think it's the end of the world if that happens. I think we just need to have a plan for what, you know, preference or precedent you would have. And of course, that's also going to depend on MAPC's bylaws. So.
And
Yeah.
statistically, you know, neither of the organizations will get the grant. So it's just like
Yeah.
a good thing to have in place. Like, don't sabotage our grants in favor of someone else's. But it also might just be a recusal process saying, you know, I've worked on this grant for this as an organization, and there's no way to prove I'm not more, you know, that I'm not like more invested in that one than I am in this one. So I'm just gonna say, like, I'm not gonna be like part of this grant.
I think
aside from maybe the final approval.
With something like that, if it really is like that direct, I think you'd have to have them decide, right? I'd have to decide, am I, you know, going to be a part of this organization for this grant or a part of the other organization? Because there's no way, I don't think there's any way to like be on both boards and, you know, have both of these organizations applying for the same grant. Like, so.
Yeah, and I think it's just the biggest thing is making sure there's a disclosure of those conflicts of interest.
Yeah, it could be that, I think, yeah, and all, like, there probably has to be in the bylaw something, a process for disclosure of disclosure for conflict of interest. There might have to be a voting procedure where then you get a, you know, consensus as to the you know, like the severity of the conflict, and then lay out steps to, okay, if it's this kind of severity, then this is what will happen. If it's this kind, then this is what will happen.
Yeah, and we'll definitely need to talk about, so there has to be a voting apparatus in place for that, but we'll have to talk about, like, okay, what is the difference between a regional representative having a conflict of interest and a board member having a conflict of interest? Is there a difference? How are we going to treat that difference? Do we have just the full membership vote every time? Or do we have all regional representatives and board of directors vote? That kind of minutia we'll have to kind of flesh out as well.
And I mean, it could be, again, this is for the bylaws, but it could be too that it just, maybe we avoid that scenario by having it in the bylaws that you can't serve on two boards at the same time. You know, like, I can't be on the board of MAPC and this board because it's, you know, you need to be able to commit to this board, right? And that would be considered its own conflict, right?
Yeah, and then we would also have to get very specific as to, you cannot be on the board, but you can continue to be a member, et cetera, because there's a bunch of us who belong to multiple, you know. And also have to think about, okay, how does that work for committee members? How does that work for, you know, all of that kind of stuff? And then, so back to this, the confidential information. So I'm a little bit uneasy with this. I really want to think about how the bylaws are going to pertain to this. You might become aware of non-public information whose confidentiality is valuable to the nonprofit. There are a few examples that I'm not uncomfortable with, like the possibility of us qualifying for a grant. That's fine. We don't need to announce that. Or like the possibility of somebody doing an interview about so-and-so, blah, blah, blah. But there's a lot of issues with transparency in other organizations that I really want us to avoid. So we're going to need to be incredibly specific about what counts as information that doesn't need to be public. And of course, that's something that can continually be updated as we update our bylaws. So
Yeah, I think, yeah, again, as long as there's a definition for it and the general membership is aware that there is certain confidential information and what might that pertain, I think that's fine. I think that's enough transparency in that sense.
yeah, I also think it would be good, and this is kind of tangential, but it's part of what you just said with the membership, being aware. I also think it might be good if we start, this is going to sound like a really weird, goofy suggestion, but almost like a suggestion box that's anonymous, where it
Sure.
is just another Google form where it's like, you know, you could either contact us directly and have a confrontation, or you could just say, you know, here's a little note about something that I found that's not working for me. I don't really need you to know who I am, because we don't really necessarily need to know who you are in order to address your concerns, you know.
Right. We
And then-
represent the members. We don't represent, you know, the member that we know. Any
Exactly.
member.
Exactly. We
Yeah,
represent
the members that we're friends with.
exactly. And I want it to be, you know, at that point where we can just be like, okay, this person's having an issue. Let's bring this up at our next board meeting, or let's bring it up at our next regional representative meeting, whichever thing happens more frequently.
And that's
I think it's-
probably more comfortable for people who have experienced like aggression from another member of the organization or something, to just say, look, I'm not going to tell you who this is, but like this, they were mean to me. Like they did something to me that was not acceptable within the rules of this organization.
Yeah.
I think having that on the website, it could be literally be like a suggestion box and say for anonymous reporting,
Hmm.
you know, however you feel comfortable reaching out, and, you know, there could be the contact name or there can be the suggestion box.
Yeah, exactly. And there's not going to be any required information other than the actual suggestion, you know?
Yeah.
Or
I would
concern.
say, yeah, and like that'll fall under like confidential information. Like that would be something that I would be, if someone wants to like publicly call out something that's not working or someone that's not treating them fairly, that's confidential, regardless of whether that one board member who's taking the complaint knows who it was.
Hmm. And it could also be an easier thing for certain things. Like, I'm sure that at some point I'm going to put my foot directly in my mouth, and it's going to happen. I'm a human being.
Mhm.
And it may be that somebody notices it and they're like, no, but they perhaps don't know me in my regular life, or they feel like a little bit weird talking to somebody who's in the position that I'm in, whatever that might be. And so they can just send me that anonymous suggestion, and I can be like, oh, let me modify my behavior, you know, and learn from that, because I didn't mean to. And then maybe at the next recorded meeting, I apologize, depending, you know, what it is and whether it necessitates an apology or actual action, you know,
Mhm.
or both. I think, you know, that would be a good thing to have, especially considering we're growth oriented. Okay, so of course, the first step is always to recognize the conflict. And again, that goes into that, you know, suggestion box, where it could be that we're talking about something in a meeting, somebody watches that meeting and they go, isn't that a conflict of interest? But none of us caught it, you know? They
Yeah.
could just send us that message and be like, hey, I think you might have a conflict of interest you don't know about, you know? I think it's a very good idea to have that accessibility to us. Et cetera, et cetera. The majority of disinterested board members, this is where I was kind of talking about, it might be a good idea to have a minimum set to 3 in the future.
Yeah.
If there is a conflict of interest, it does say that a majority of disinterested board members, not less than 2, can provide a conflict transaction, or I'm sorry, a conflict, transaction, if they believe the transaction is in the nonprofit's best interests. So we would need at least 3 people in order to properly do that. And 3 people who are not related to each other also. Which, you know, isn't that common in printmaking, but there are a couple of people who are related and printmakers. So I'm going to kind of skim through this really quickly and see if there's anything important that I'm missing. This is just more information about that. The duty of obedience is the next thing. And of course, that's following the organization's purposes and goals as stated in the articles of incorporation and bylaws. So any kind of written statements, we really need to make sure the board of directors are adhering to that. So we'll have to write that out really clearly as well. This little act right here is important. This is where we have to legally provide protection for whistleblowers. And I do think what we were just talking about might also help with that, the kind of anonymous reporting box. Maybe we set up that Google form in a way that it sends them a copy as well somehow, but doesn't report their email address to us so that they can have a receipt of their interaction with us. But yeah, I think that's we'll have to think of something specific so that it's public record and also that they might be able to have it personally to bring it up again later.
Their own receipts.
Yes. And then that's about it for that. Now we're at the mission statement review. We're going to come back to this. I just want to skim through and make sure that we're not missing anything else. Then list for the important provisions of the bylaws. We don't have any bylaw members here right now, but we've also already decided that board of directors and mission statement come first, and then we'll do bylaws. Well, I guess really what it is we've got mission statement. Currently we have 2 interim board of directors, and then, which I'll get some documentation from Olivia through the email to make sure that she's actually all right with being, because things might have changed, I'm not sure. So I'll send her an email at the end of this meeting that'll be kind of publicly accessible, or at least volunteer accessible. And then since we have our interim board of directors, theoretically, we would start with the bylaws. And I think the section we would need to start with is the board of directors section. So that Olivia and I both know when we're overstepping our bounds. But yeah, this is the part that I was really excited about, was that we can have a minimum and maximum number of board members. So a minimum of 5, maximum of 15. Some states do specify a minimum. I'm going to double check and see if North Carolina does. But since we're technically not incorporated yet, it doesn't quite matter if we go with just us 2 for now. But once we get to that incorporation.
Early in the document that you must have at least 1.
Yeah.
Which I'm wondering if that's North Carolina's, because it is North Carolina's.
I think that's what it said. North Carolina, you can incorporate with just 1.
Okay, cool. Then I'm not sure why they. You know what? They're probably Frankensteining different documents together. Okay, so that makes.
And they want to make sure you read the first part.
Yeah, it's true, because you could just be like, no, I don't have time for this. Okay, so we would want to specify a maximum, and then of course, maybe make a stipulation in the bylaws of like, we will revisit this in the next 6 months at the end of the interim board of directors term. Of course, term limits, indemnification, I think is also going to be a really important thing for us to start with. I do think we might want to rearrange the order of these, like it has this all the way down here, but I do think indemnification is more important than the board membership kind of numbers. And I also think it's really important to state that we have members. So we might have to kind of shuffle these around. Then there's the quorum. I'm not sure how many, if we have a minimum for a quorum in North Carolina, so I'll have to look. Terms and term limits, titles of officers, procedure for removing a board member or officer, conflict of interest policy, which when we last got together, or maybe it was when I was talking to Olivia, but the conflict of interest is, I think, going to take a little bit of precedent over some of this information, but it definitely needs to happen before January and before we start accepting membership dues. And then the minimum number of board meetings per year. how a special emergency board meeting might be called, committee creation and dissolution, what committees exist, that we're going to have a big conversation about. We're also going to have a big conversation about how often, how often committees are reviewed and how often we kind of revise this section of our bylaws. But we'll have to, I think what we should do is shoot for the stars and then email it to a lawyer, and then the lawyer can be like, no, you have to be more specific. You can't just say we will have an indefinite number of committees based on membership preference and requirement. We can't, if we can't do that, they can tell us that. And then of course, we are really going to need to do the conference calls and electronic meetings bylaw section ASAP. ASAP after the things we've talked about, because we are entirely going to be online and we need to talk about how votes are going to happen. Because here it says, they would be prohibited. For us, we really need to talk about how we're expecting our membership to vote and really get that fleshed out early in the creation of the bylaws.
I was gonna say, I guess it's gonna be, they have to attend meetings, right? How, if right? I mean, that's part of being a member, is if you attend the members meeting, you get your member vote,
Mm-hmm. Well, I also think, so we've talked before about opening up mass voting for a week, sending them a link to a Google form, and then promoting it via the mailing list. And what I am not sure about is if we should also promote it through Instagram, because currently we don't have actual members. So is this stuff, are the bylaws something that all potential members are going to be voting on, which I think is a good idea because we don't technically have a membership yet, we'd like to become what they want us to be. And then after we've kind of opened it up to them, we start filing it out. And then at the end of perhaps, let's say, a year, we do a revision where we're just like, okay, now this is only open to members specifically who must vote through the emailing list. And we will promote that there is voting going on via Instagram, but we will not share the link through Instagram, something like that, so that it becomes a little bit more closed now that we're actually accepting membership dues, So that's something we're really going to have to flesh out the exact language of. And I think that specifically we will want to have more eyes on it, including the mailing list, including Instagram, and including YouTube, because I think that they will have a say on how they want to promote that kind of stuff and how they can actually, what amount of energy they can put into collecting the votes, what amount of energy they can put into typing out voting, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't want to basically create a requirement for them that they can't keep up with. But that is it. Then it's just the ABCs of organization for the bylaws. We don't need to talk about that too much. But we do, I'm scrolling back up to the mission statement review. So we are going to be telling the aim, direction, or grand intent of the organization. We talked a little bit about this at the end of the last meeting. The main thing that I had mentioned that the interest meeting document pretty much covers a lot of what would be the mission statement at this point. Why do we exist? What's the purpose or essence of the organization? Target population? What is our general desire for the long run, et cetera, et cetera. Like they said, it's the why, not the how. I'm going to stop sharing this if that's okay with you all.
Sure.
Because I want to open another document. I'm going to open it in our Google Drive so that you all can access it as well. If I remember what I'm doing. so let me shrink you all down a little bit. I'm going to put this, I'm going to put the mission statement document in our legal folder. Okay. For now. I might end up just combining bylaw and legal into one folder because there might be a few things that are just for legal, but I do think bylaw and legal are going to be kind of interdependent for a while now, for the foreseeable future anyway. So what am I going to call this? It is a mission statement. That's right.
Stop. Hey.
Okay. So I'm in the RIPG account. How do you guys want to kind of draft this? Do you want me to just type as we go and I can share my screen?
That
Or,
would be great.
Sure.
all right. Oh, I actually have to click share. I can't just click the window and then move on with my life.
I know I had to have some students be like, you're not sharing your screen actually. And I'm like, thank you.
Yes. I love when they actually tell you, because sometimes they'll just be like, okay, so as far as our general mission goes, so there's a little description of our name. There's a description of, actually, why don't I just copy paste? Hang on just a second. Let me bring this down here so I can see what I'm doing.
I was going to say, if it was kind of in that initial document, then we can just kind of like edit that down.
Yeah,
Unless
I think I'm going to
we
copy paste it because there's like too much information here. All right, so that's the meeting purpose. It's essentially like I literally called it the general mission. I'm going to scroll through this document really quickly to see if there's anything else that should be. So we're not looking at how, we're just looking at why. We're not looking at actions or funding or accessibility necessarily. We can say that it will be accessible, but we don't need to get into the minute details of how we're going to accomplish that. Code of conduct. Yeah, okay. So that is it. So I think what we can do is go through and kind of eliminate the things that aren't relevant first, and then restructure it as an actual statement and not just a collection of words. So do you all think that it's important to kind of talk about the name of the group? Intersectional.
In the mission, I wouldn't say, but in like an about us section, it would be super relevant. Like about us, this is what we mean by radical. This is what we think a guild is.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point, because that's a big question we get asked a lot. Like Olivia and I specifically have been asked that question a few times where they're like, why radical? And there's plenty of facetious answers, but the real answer is because we're agents of change.
Yeah, and it just worries people after things like rad femmes and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm not trying to be.
But it has a meaning, and it's a useful meaning.
Exactly.
Or people like my dad who think we're all, socialists.
Yeah. Yeah. We're going to burn down all the banks. Like, no, we're not doing that. We don't have time for that. We're busy. So one statement that is here is restructuring our community through grassroots organization. The formatting got all wonky, but is that kind of a concept that we want to hold on to?
I would say yes.
Mm-hmm.
And then here I have some questions. Are we insular, concerned with printmaking only? Do we focus on printmaking in the broader art community and the broader community? Where do we want to fall with that in our mission statement? Or do you want to come back to it?
Well, I think that definitely needs to be answered because in a sense, like that's it, right? Like who is our community? Like how are we defining it?
Mhm.
Because how else are we gonna say, because I
Who
think,
do we serve?
yeah, like
Mhm.
who do we serve I think the serving is definitely at the core of our mission.
Okay.
Service. So who are we serving? Um yeah, I mean,
Let me, I think I might have an answer to this in a different document, so hold on. I keep everything. I'm awful. um, but I think it was something that we talked about last meeting. Let me double check and make sure we actually talked about it and I'm not full of baloney. I can't be full of baloney. I'm a vegetarian. Um,
because yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of, I've obviously, because I just went to the MAPC conference, I'm thinking about their mission statement, and it does specifically lay out the printmaking community, but I think there is so much wiggle room with that because, especially with MAPC, because initially I thought I couldn't be on the board because I'm not in Mid-America.
Mhm.
It's like I'm on the East Coast, and they're like, oh no, it's it started as a way to kind of create a more accessible conference, and that's initially where the name came from. So I think there is, again, I guess I think there's a wiggle room, so we can define something, but it can be kind of vague. I don't think it needs to be very specific, like super specific.
So what if we were to
Um,
call it the printmaking and the printmaking adjacent community?
I guess so, because I'm also thinking just the artistic lives of printmakers and like how far they extend in every direction. Because we're going to get printmakers who are paper makers, who are book artists, who are interested in fibers, people who come at it from a fine arts practice, people who come at it from a craft perspective. Like the artistic lives of
Especially, yeah.
printmakers go everywhere.
And it could also be like we have been asked before, like, is it okay if a print curator joins this organization? And like, of course it's okay if a print curator joins this organization,
Yeah, they're part of our artistic lives.
Exactly. And we don't often get to talk to print curators, and I think it's very integral that we do. So little things like that. And also we're not necessarily an educational group. We're not necessarily a professional group. We're a community. So I think it's a good idea for, like you were saying, Annie, for us to be that vague, but also inclusive at the same time, Okay, so we'll leave that there. Then there's the different levels of engagement, primarily online to begin with, and then we move to regional events when safe. What an optimist I was in July. And then to national and regional events. So I think we don't even need to, my personal opinion is we don't need to talk about what we will be because we can revise those bylaws as time goes on.
I agree with that. And, if we're meeting in person, like that's pretty far in the future, regardless of whether there's a pandemic.
Yeah.
I think part of the strength of this organization is that it is virtual. Because that gets to the heart of it being more accessible. I think that there isn't, you don't have to physically go somewhere, and you also, maybe you feel safer too being part of something where you're not having to sit face to face with somebody. You feel more comfortable joining that way. So
yeah, for sure. And then, okay, so this isn't on here, but I have a very big question for the two of you. We've got several questions about whether or not we will be international. Would you all like to be international? Do you think that that's something manageable given all of the tasks and duties that we have so far to become a national or an international organization?
I really like Heather, who lives in Canada.
Yes, yeah. And maybe that's something we do is we refer to, sorry, I almost said it and I got grossed out, but we refer to ourselves as like Americas only.
What does that mean? Oh, yeah, that's like all the
Yeah,
continent.
and that way we are international, but we're making a demarcation of like, right now we're only serving these specific communities.
I would say like, yeah, the continent of America.
We're
But to think,
continental.
well, continental America usually just means that Hawaiians don't get to participate. Like,
Yeah.
um, but it's like open to expanding in the future.
Yeah. Maybe at this point we just don't say anything about it at all.
I was gonna say, do we need to say that do we need to geographically limit anything? I don't think so, because I think that essentially what's gonna happen is, I don't know if it's relevant yet to say it's international, because what about our members? And then essentially our members are gonna drive the priorities. Like, if it does turn out that we're getting tons of people from the United Kingdom per se that are joining, then maybe we have them form a committee. And
Yeah, or like PCL right now, Miranda's in Thailand, I think, Bangkok. So how do we deal with that? Like, is it about where you reside? Is it about your, and I really don't want to start trading in the concept of residency statuses, because yucky.
Yeah.
And that's got nothing to do with your printmaking, so I think maybe we'll just say, either we'll say irrespective of geography, or we'll say nothing, and everybody can just follow their heart. Okay. The only thing that I'm a little bit like, I don't know if this is going to change it, is whether or not that will change our tax exempt status if we're an international, or any other kind of tax forms or documentation. But I'm not really sure.
Yeah, because I know all like a whole, there's a whole swath of printmakers like right across the border that come to SGCI and MAPC events, and they're all Canadians.
I was about to say, technically isn't I say SGC, but it's SGCI. So technically,
Yeah.
aren't they international? Like, isn't that why the I was added?
Yeah.
So I don't think it changed. I don't think it changed anything.
And things like renaming, because it's not obvious enough that, we're not just regional, definitely can come around later down the line if it becomes an issue.
Yeah, exactly. And especially because we're talking about like the language of regional representatives. Do we still have regional representatives if we become international and we've got 4 people in Canada and 1 guy in Maine? Like, how do are they one region now? Where in Canada are they? Yeah. So it's, I also kind of am wondering if geography is going to serve us in any way when we
Do
describe.
it by time zone.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, there we go. That way they can have meetings on their own time zone, because that actually might be a very good idea now that I think about it.
Because I think having the word virtual in there, I think should help people realize that, like, oh, I can join wherever I am.
Exactly. Yeah. And we've said it before, I mean, we want to fit our membership. So if they want to be international, we'll be international.
Yeah. So I wouldn't define it.
Okay. Okay. And then we're welcoming of allyship. I do think this is an important thing to say, because when people hear intersectional, and they don't necessarily have an intersectional identity that they're either aware of or comfortable with, or at all, they might be like, oh, that's not for me. And we did get this question a lot at the interest meeting and also just in personal interactions. And like, if you think of me as an intersection, I'm like a 5-way street.
Yeah.
But I also think we need to be very clear that like 2-way streets are also open. Like, you can show up too, you don't have to be one of those ridiculous intersections in St. Louis. Be a
roundabout.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's where a lot of like the potential for change is too, because I wouldn't be interested in joining the board of certain organizations because I wouldn't know how much my voice would be even valued if I was able to get on the board to begin with. Versus having allies in the organization, it's like, well, this is a place for you to go advocate for us.
Exactly. And to learn how to advocate for us. And when you're not doing it, we will tell you.
Yeah.
I don't know. I was talking to Ruben and they were talking about different roles in organizational structure. And they mentioned the disruptor. And I was like, I have problems all the time and I will tell you immediately.
Mhm.
Okay, so we'll definitely keep in the welcoming of allyship. And then I don't think we will talk at all about this aspect, the ally collaboration, inclusion, sponsorship. I think we just need to say welcoming of allyship. I think if we get too specific, it's going to be a very long mission statement. And again, for anyone involved at print in any level, not just printmakers and academics.
Because we can have a mission statement and then we can have our values, you know, like then, because you can have that sentence that's a mission statement. And then, because I mean, if you look a lot of organizations, they have the, what is it? Values underneath where they kind of then define the kind of the themes that come up in the mission statement in a little bit more detail. Like
Mhm.
one of our values can be allyship, and then we define a little bit more what that looks like.
Yeah. And that can also be something, you're right, we could have like a value section, or it could be in our About Us. You know, maybe
Yeah.
we have a value section in our About Us page.
I think that would be really important because I think there are some like key terms like adapt, you know, like accessibility, allyship, you know, like there are some key things about this organization.
Mhm.
And would be helpful to define those for people so they know, oh, it is what I'm thinking, or oh, this is really interesting, you know, like it just kind of helps you when you're joining a new group.
Mhm. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Then there's this statement, inclusion is inherent in our conception, without pain as our impetus for change. So do you want to include that? I do think it's important that we use the word inclusion, not diversity, at some point in our mission statement.
No, I'm agreeing. Sorry. I was like, I realize I'm being very quiet for a while. I'm just trying to think about what would be the best way to say that. Just use the word inclusion.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, let's see how many other things we have to say,
mhm.
and then kind of maybe we can whittle it down, or it can coincide with another term like accessibility.
Be an inclusive organization.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Individual and collective growth is the primary focus of the organization. I do think that needs to stay in the mission statement. We are focused on that growth mindset for sure. And then a safe space in which we can share knowledge, experiences, and information about our personal lives and printmaking successes and struggles. We value our members as individuals. Is that something that belongs here or in our values?
What to say? We share knowledge, experience, and information.
Okay.
It seems really interesting.
I was gonna say, isn't that kind of the mission is to be, are you okay?
Sorry, there was just a crash of lightning outside my window, or the lightning, the electric one. I'm gonna look out the window real quick.
Okay.
I'm the only person in the basement with a window. I feel responsible for this. Whoa. Okay. Yeah, it must have just hit
Crazy.
one of the
saw your
towers on the building.
It said, "Happy Halloween, Chelsea."
Yeah.
I know,
We're really in the spooky month.
Horror movies start. I was like, what's going on?
I thought a car hit the building for a second. So
Oh gosh, wow.
that has happened.
Oh no.
Okay.
Ugh.
I think like that's like the mission, right? To create an inclusive space to do this, and this, right?
Ooh,
Like-
so that's a good place for inclusion to go.
Yeah. Instead of I would say inclusive space as opposed to, because safe, I mean, I feel like that thus then implies it's safe.
Yeah, and it's not. We will criticize you. No.
Yeah. And
It's a
I would
safe
say
level of criticism, but
constructive criticism.
exactly.
An inclusive
Um,
space where knowledge, experiences, and information. I was on a roll and then I lost it. I need to write this down. I do better when I'm like writing it out. Okay.
yeah.
Space and entry.
Because I feel like that, like an inclusive space that we enter with a growth mindset as we share knowledge, experience, and information.
Yeah, like this is almost the mission right here, like in that one
Yeah.
sentence. And if we just like
Yeah.
plug in the rest of it, that's why I'm
Okay.
like, I'm almost there.
Well, let's see if there's any other parts to put into this whole with a
I
double.
also think like allyship and then like what does radical mean? Like those are two great Q&A questions to
Mhm.
start off with. Like,
Yeah.
are allies welcome? Yes. Like,
Yes.
and these are all on the same page in my brain.
Yeah. I think that's a good idea too. Okay. We'll have to keep that like filed in our brains for the website group. Okay, so this next part is the creation of communities, opportunities, etc. Because that was in the actions section, I think we might not want to have that in the mission statement.
I think that's that more of a how this happens kind of thing.
Okay,
Yeah.
so let's take that out. I do think it's good to use the word responsive, maybe the phrase responsive policies. Oh no. But I don't think we need to talk about the fact that we're designed that way,
Mhm.
So some of that verbiage I think will need to change. Cultivate rapid improvement and ensure that the RIPG works for its members as much as possible. I do think this sentiment is important, but there's definitely a better way to say it.
Right. We value our members as individuals. We work for our members. It's a lot of that is kind of in there in different ways. So like just involving the membership in the mission statement. So they are centered in the mission.
Yes, that's a very good point. I don't think we need cultivate rapid improvement. We've already talked about the growth mindset.
Yeah, growth mindset.
Okay. Transparency is very important to me to keep in this mission statement so that it is upheld at all times. I don't think we need to talk about the how here because it's very specific.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's another good Q&A. What do you mean by transparent?
Exactly. You can see our insides now. And then volunteer run. I do think that's also important. I get a little fuzzy on how we're going to continue to say that if we do start giving out stipends. But
you can actually, so I just learned this. I thought if you were a volunteer, that meant you were unpaid. But I just learned that in Kentucky, the election officers are technically volunteering. They get paid for their time.
Huh.
Yeah, so I don't know. I'm trying to learn more about what that could possibly mean. Because yeah, my partner is an election officer right now, and he's making bank.
Nice. So can volunteers be paid for their time, be compensated, I suppose?
Yeah, and it is $4.50. That was my alarm going off for that.
Oh, nice.
Okay, thank you. So if it's all right with you, we might run over by like 10, 15 minutes. Is that okay with both of you?
Yeah, that lightning strike woke me up. So
okay. Well, just let me know if you guys have to run. So can volunteers be paid or compensated for time? That is something that I will look into. Or
I would say the Radical Intersectional Printmakers Guild is a volunteer-run organization that, and then kind of moving on from the sentence there.
I was gonna say I would say it's a what we said a print and print adjacent community that creates an inclusive space where knowledge, experience, and information relevant to our members can be shared in an accessible and equitable way. We use a virtual engagement to blah blah, and then that's kind of where I lost. That's where I stopped writing.
Okay. So
and we do
pause
want to
real
be as
quick for
pitchy
that.
as possible.
Sure.
Yes. There's one last big chunk right here. The guild is run in the spare time of organizers and members. We are not run for profit, cannot afford to pay, blah, blah, blah. I don't think any of that information is relevant. I do think we might want to add something that says preference will be, not necessarily that preference will be given to the voice of marginalized printmakers, but maybe design, or well,
To
some
uplift
verb
them
to elevate.
or to center them as part of our mission.
Ooh, yeah, I like center better because we're loud enough.
Yeah, and I feel like
Um,
centering the margin. Like this is a group that centers the margin.
Yes, I think I prefer that terminology. Center
Oh, these are good. So do you imagine the mission statement being kind of like a couple of sentences or like bullet points? What do you think?
I think it should be like a paragraph.
A paragraph? Okay.
I think it depends because some of the things in a mission are like meant to be one kind of like a really sexy sentence, so it has like all the different parts of speech in it, you know. You know, you can add like a semicolon and it can say and then it has like a little dash for another part of it. And so it does end up being like perhaps the longest sentence you've ever written, but
Yeah.
the anything that is so non-essential to the mission that you could break, point, and keep going, it's probably not part of the mission. It's probably more of like a vision or an action statement. And so I think like especially like a vision statement, but you know, you all have an action statement kind of started and thought about, but a vision statement to accompany it where it's like, this is what the printmaking world looks like if our organization is no longer needed, you know. They're meant to be really idealistic. Vision statements are like, there will be no interpersonal violence in our community any longer if our organization has been successful.
All organizations will be oriented towards all types of printmakers at all times forever. Amen. No.
That's pretty much, and they're super idealistic like that. And
Yeah.
you know, they don't necessarily even need to account for the fact that like things will change. Like women are 51% of the population now. So
Yeah.
men are on the margin, get on the margins.
Yeah.
So like it doesn't really account for like things like that, but it just says like if everything was the way that we wanted it to be, you know, our like Miss America speech kind of.
Yeah.
World peace.
Yeah, I think all right, so I've written those two ideas down, the vision statement, the Q&A section. I feel like I'm missing something though. Was there another idea?
You
that
put an
we-
action statement or like action section was in parentheses somewhere, and I was like, that's really interesting because we have like the what we do, how we do it, and then the why is the vision statement.
Mhm. Okay, and I also think that it's a good idea to have shorter pages like that or shorter collections of information in that way than making people go, basically saying, well, why don't you read our bylaws?
Yeah.
Like, well, maybe because I'm not a lawyer and that hurts my heart.
Yeah, and these should all guide our bylaws.
I was going to
Yeah.
say, so yeah, the vision statement is expanding on the values. The Q&A defines some of the terms for people. And then the action statement is kind of like where we talk more about the how, which would be the bylaws, but you know, people can
like a summation almost.
Yeah. Like
Yeah, and you can also say
and regional you know.
we publish videos.
Mm-hmm.
We host virtual conferences. We host virtual programming. We have
Exactly.
we have an Instagram page.
Yes. Yeah. Meet our member kind of posts and things like that.
I keep forgetting to do
Vision
that.
statement I'm going to put in parentheses so that we kind of remember. Okay, and then Q&A. Okay, cool. So let's get into the mission statement then, because this really helps us to have like different places to file away things that, as we're kind of honing this statement out, don't necessarily need to be here. So I have two starting statements. One is the starting statement from Chelsea. The Radical Intersectional Printmakers Guild is a nonprofit organization designed to center the voices of marginalized printmakers and
And then-
possibly supporting these communities. Mhm.
I would say by fostering an inclusive space in which we can share knowledge, experience, and information.
I was gonna say the same thing. It says creates an inclusive space, but that's fine. Like that's kind of where I was too.
Let's go with create
Creates.
Okay.
and
Or,
inclusive,
yeah,
just
creating.
because fostering has or some connotations to that might not be
Okay.
a big deal.
Yeah, and
Um,
creating is at the top of that taxonomy of words.
Exactly. So creating an inclusive space, and then what was the second part?
It's from up above,
Where
E
knowledge-
and then subsection I.
Yeah. I said where knowledge, experiences, information relevant to our members can be shared. Because I kind of reframed that sentence, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Where knowledge, experience, and information relevant to our members can be shared. I said in an accessible and equitable way.
Accessible, equitable, and transparent way.
Yes.
Yeah, and we got to really decide on that equity. Equity as a good word instead of equality.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, totally. That's where I was like equitable.
All right. So let me combine these statements before I forget that they're one.
Do you want to say the Radical Intersectional Printmakers Guild is a volunteer run?
Volunteer led.
Led, yes, led, run, led. Nonprofit organization designed to center the voices of marginalized printmakers by creating an inclusive space where knowledge, experiences, and information relevant to our membership can be shared in an accessible, transparent, and equitable way.
Okay, so let me eliminate the things that we have already said.
World's sexiest sentence. They really got to be fancy.
I was about to say, I was like, we almost hit all of it. We just need to talk about allyship and virtual engagement.
And maybe a little bit about
Our community, maybe it's 2 sentences. Our community is the printmaking and print adjacent. And print adjacent. I'm trying to think of a sexy way to say this. Okay.
how about we start with the Radical Intersectional Printmakers Guild is a community of printmakers and print adjacent people.
That is volunteer led. Wait, that is a volunteer led nonprofit
Oh,
organization.
here we go. There's a better way to say that. So it's a community of for anyone involved in
Print-minded.
print at any level, period. We are volunteer led. So it could be that this little section gets cut off and put down here somewhere.
Mm.
So maybe instead we say we are a community for anyone involved in print.
I would say that, yeah, I would say because we can talk about community and allyship and then kind of like where we are in the next sentence. We're a community for anyone involved in print at any level, welcoming of allyship through remote engagement. Is that too short? Do we need to add something?
Let's see. How important is grassroots organization?
I think by saying we're volunteer-led nonprofit, that kind of, I mean, you guys can disagree, but I feel like saying we're volunteer-led is kind of very much the same vein
Very
as,
grassroots.
yeah.
Let's see. Marginalized printmakers by creating an inclusive space.
I do think we should stress that we work for our members as much as possible.
Okay.
We're responsive. So maybe we say we work for our members.
Welcoming of allyship through virtual engagement. What about, we are a community for anyone involved in print at any level, welcoming of allyship through virtual engagement, supporting the work of our members through responsive policies and actions.
I think that's too many
Too many?
in one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Responsive policies.
I mean, is it too cheesy to say we are an organization of we are created by members for members, like using that phrase, by people,
Yeah.
for people?
I mean, I say it a lot. So I don't have a problem putting it up there. And I also think this is the place to be as cheesy as we can, you know?
I feel like that gets this, and that I think that gets the idea across a little bit more strongly than we work for our members as much as possible. I like the idea of saying we are by the members for the members.
We are our membership.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of the verbiage to use for that. That is by our members, for our members. The reason I'm thinking of the verbiage is if English isn't your first language, that's a weird sentence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're a group founded by members, for members. Like, yeah, what's the verb?
Yeah, we are a group that is. Let's come back to that. Let's come back to it. Inclusion is inherent in our conception. Oh, well, we do need to say that still. I'm just going to cut and paste that one.
I mean, that could be the last sentence. The end. Done. I'm gonna grab my computer charger. I'll be right back. I can still hear you.
Okay. And we've got our virtual engagement. We've got printmaking at any level. I think advocacy and involvement might actually have been too specific of a phrase. We haven't talked about allyship yet, or growth. With the word growth, I think.
I would definitely say just like we are anyone involved in print at any level, welcoming of allyship is what you have there. So allies are definitely involved in it.
Oh, I did write that. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so let's take that out. And then I changed it to inclusion and growth are inherent. I think I'm actually going to say intrinsic instead of inherent. In our conception, without pain as our impetus for change. An inclusive space in which we can share knowledge, experiences, and information about our personal lives and our printmaking successes and struggles. We talked about that. It's just the valuing our members as individuals we might want to put in there, maybe. But that's also potentially a value instead.
I was about to say, because I feel like that's kind of implied when we say where we creating an inclusive space where knowledge, experience, and information relevant to our membership. And then when we stress that we are created of members, so that's kind of implied. And then in our values area, that's where we can define that a little bit more.
Okay. Yeah. So let's read it then. The Radical Intersectional Printmakers Guild is a volunteer-led, nonprofit organization designed to center the voices of marginalized printmakers by creating an space where knowledge, experiences, and information relevant to our membership can be shared in an accessible, transparent, and equitable way. I think that statement is strong.
Yeah.
Then we are a community for anyone involved in print at any level, welcoming of allyship. How about I say and?
Or we're at any level, welcoming of allyship And then through virtual engagement, just makes it sound like the allies are only allowed to come to virtual meetings.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm thinking what we could say instead is, let's take the allyship out.
We could also say we are a virtual community.
That's true.
Do we need to say that? Do we need to limit that though in our mission statement? Because that could be more of the like how we operate as opposed
Yeah,
to
for now.
yeah. Because I don't necessarily want the mission statement to I mean, not that it's saying it does, but it could kind of feel like it's limiting us to either being a virtual community or virtual engagement when maybe that's not at all what this group will transform into later, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So are you saying we should just take virtual engagement out?
I think so.
Okay. We are a community for anyone involved in print at any level.
I guess that's more of an action statement.
Yeah.
We are a group that is by our members, for our members. Okay, so I think we can combine we are a community for anyone involved in print at any level, and we are a group that is by our members, for our members.
You want to say we are a community for anyone involved in print at any level, designed by our members for our members through responsive policies and actions to support the intersexual communities.
How about we say governed by the
Okay.
policies?
So other design, because I know I was repeating it.
So we're a community for anyone involved in print at any level, governed by responsive policies, designed by our members,
Mhm.
for our members. And then I'm thinking if we could translate that into another language to make sure we understood it, it would probably be good. But I'm also going to run it through Google Translate in case somebody chooses to do that to it. The only language that I speak, that I can read in relatively fluently is, well, Spanish, and I can try German and we'll see what happens. But I'm not good at grammar for German, so probably Spanish. For a group that is by our members, for our members.
To support the intersexual community.
Okay. So we just
Yeah.
top this off.
Yeah.
To support the intersectional communities we represent. We are a community for anyone involved in print at any level, governed by responsive policies designed by our members for our members to support the intersectional communities that we represent.
I feel like that feels redundant.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's an opportunity there to combine the last two sentences. We are a community for anyone involved in print at any level, governed by responsive policies designed by our members for our members to support the intersectional communities we represent, with the understanding that inclusion and growth are intrinsic to our conception, without pain as our impetus for change.
Okay. Got some formatting problems that are okay. All right, so then perhaps we don't really need to say supporting. And then what part of that is redundant for you, Annie?
Oh, I was just wondering if the phrase "we represent" was redundant, but it doesn't. Like when Chelsea read it again, it didn't sound that bad.
Okay.
We are a community for anyone involved in print at any level, governed by responsive policies designed by our members for our members to support the intersectional communities. And then I thought the phrase "we represent" might not be necessary, but I mean, if you guys think it flows fine, I'm totally cool leaving it in.
Do we need intersectional here?
I guess we say intersectional twice.
Yeah.
And we're also, when we do the intersectional, it also sounds, again, exclusive to people with intersectional identities and not allies. So
I was going to say, if we make it, it seems like if we say up front, like the idea that it's inclusive, I don't think we need to, I mean, maybe we do need to belabor it. I don't know. It feels like we don't need to keep then especially because this is short. Like, again, it's just 2 sentences. I think if this was a longer document, yeah.
Yeah, and I think there will also be written documentation, like we said in the Q&A, which I just remembered, Chelsea suggested putting the description of our name in that
Yeah.
sort of area, either the Q&A or in the values or something like that.
Oh, I
or
definitely
about
think,
us.
I definitely think in the Q&A it should be like, why radical? Like that, literally that document should be
Mhm.
repeated that we had in the, begin interest meeting, like why radical?
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to take out intersectional because it's
Mhm.
a little unnecessary. And then let's see what else. I'm going to format it all so it's the same because it's making my head hurt.
Oof. I've been waiting for this moment.
I really want to do Helvetica, but I guess we're going to do Arial. So individual and collective growth is the primary focus of the organization. I do, so where is it that we have growth? I want to, okay. We represent with the understanding that inclusion and growth are intrinsic in our conception. Okay, so we do say that it is intrinsic or at least very, very relevant. So that's good.
And I mean, we can also like, again, like in our values, be like, what kind of growth do we value?
Mhm.
And that's where it can be defined a little bit more in detail.
Yeah.
So we say inclusive space at the beginning.
Mhm.
I might use a synonym that like might help clarify. Instead of saying inclusive and then inclusion, change one of them to access or accessibility.
Okay.
I don't know which one, but they could both. Inclusion is about access.
Okay. And then, well, what would happen is we would have to get rid of accessibility.
Accessible, yeah.
Man.
Here. And I think accessible fits really well here
I
because
do too. Henry, stop.
so what if we were to say,
Understanding that growth is intrinsic in our conception.
yeah.
How do you define inclusion?
For me, it's not just an alternative to diversity, but it's also diversifying is something that has this implication of after the fact. And so inclusion has the idea of the way that you kind of use that phrase, inclusivity, inclusion, feels more directly tied with the inception of an organization instead of kind of backdating to become diversified. So that's part of why I'm really into that term. I also really want to stay away from diversity.
Right.
But let's think, there's probably another synonym in the world that's unobjectionable, theoretically.
I'm bringing up the online thesaurus.
I mean, that's kind of where I'm at because I'm like, I understand that the way, yeah, like I like that the way we're framing it is that like we are creating with that mindset as opposed to changing something after it's already been created. So like, creating with inclusion as our mindset to begin with. So how do you say that without using the word inclusion?
Yeah. How do we include people without including them? I'm also going to pull up a thesaurus because I'm stumped. Okay, because inclusion is more of an action or state of including or being included. Oh, it's apparently from Latin. That's fun, which means to shut in. All right. There is a conjugation of it, inclusionary, that we could consider using. but it doesn't deal with our redundancy issue really at all.
Does it matter? That's kind of where I mean, like, I feel like inclusive space is a different term to me than the word inclusion.
Mhm.
And I feel like defining the space is really important, but then saying that we are about inclusion is really important too.
We could also talk about heterogeneity, but the problem with that is it's very much biological as a term, and there will be people who, for instance, that term might be an ugly have ugly connotations for somebody who happens to be like a trans person, right?
Which term? I'm sorry, what?
Heterogeneity, geneity. I never say it right the first time. We could variety, miscellany, assortment, melange, array, multiplicity. I think, see, there's part of me that's like, what if we just put intersectionality there? But then I'm like, that's very redundant. That's going to be incredibly redundant on this page, you know? What if there is something else? There's probably not going to be. Yeah, I didn't think so.
Yeah, those words don't have a lot of synonyms.
No, they're new words.
I'm wondering if it's at a point, like, now we're just kind of like, not nitpicking, because that makes it sound like it's not important, but since we're kind of stuck on a particular word, as opposed to still trying to figure out the whole thing, is it at a point where people can look at it now?
Yeah, people could definitely look at this.
Yeah, maybe we're not going to say anything, and then we'll be like, if someone points out, you know.
I think that's would be what I'm saying is like, is it at a point where people could look at it and then maybe someone can offer a better solution?
Yeah.
I feel like I am too, like, I'm too much of in it right now to be able to see any other way of saying it.
I agree with you. I do think that they will have feedback on this for sure. And I think that feedback is going to not just come for the use of the word inclusion or the potential redundancies, but they'll probably pick this apart in a way that's going to be really beneficial altogether. So I think, yes, I guess let's do one more read through. Radical Intersectional Printmakers Guild is a volunteer-led nonprofit organization designed to center the voices of marginalized printmakers and allies by creating an inclusive space where knowledge, experiences, and information relevant to our membership can be shared in an accessible, transparent, and equitable way. We are a community for anyone involved in print at any level, governed by responsive policies designed by our members for our members, to support the communities we represent with the understanding that inclusion and growth are intrinsic in our conception, without pain as our impetus for change. And we might even break these into smaller sentences, that last one especially, but I think we're at a point where we can offer that up to other people.
Yeah.
And it also might even be something that when we come back to it later, we're going to be like, let's break that up a little bit in certain ways we're not thinking about in this very moment.
Because I feel like the core is there, like the mission is there, and now it's just a way of making sure it's easy to read, you know, like that is it easy to understand, and are the ideas as transparent as we think they are?
Yes.
Something I think would be nice for the membership especially is to, like you said, thinking about translating it. And see if anyone who wants to give feedback can like provide a translation or like provide a translation in a language they might know. Or have people like, do you want to rewrite this sentence? How would you rewrite it? How would you rewrite this?
Yeah.
And you can really see like the strongest parts of the sentences emerging, or like what people are really picking up on from the original statement, if you like challenge people to do that.
Yeah. And I think it'll also be good to talk to the people who are working on that translation, because like this will translate just fine into German, because German has behemoth sentences. Like
Mhm.
that's just the sentence structure. But it might not translate as well into, let's say, Japanese, which I have no knowledge of the sentence structure there. So I have no way of knowing whether or not these long sentences are going to become so like obfuscated that we can't even process what they mean, you know.
Mhm.
So I think that's a very good idea. My next question is, how are we going to share this with the membership? Should we just send it through email? Should we send it through email and promote it on Instagram with a link? What do you all think we should do?
I am team send it out through every form of engagement, and then have some sort of, can you tell us where you responded to this? Because then we know for the next part, like, okay, the most people are accessing it through this media. Like, let's send out all of our bylaws this way.
Okay.
I don't want to create more work, but could we create a Google form for this?
I was actually about to say that, because I think that would be the easiest link to share across platforms.
Exactly.
And get the engagement result.
And yeah, and it essentially becomes a survey. So we can have like the statement, we can ask them, where did you just, what platform did you use to access this from? And we can list Instagram, we can list, all the different things, so we can see how they found it. How did you find out about this? And
and it could be like, could you translate an optional one? Because you have the ones you put the stars by and the ones you don't. An optional one saying like, could you translate this into? Is there a language that that you could translate this into for us?
Yeah, if you speak a different language, can this be? Would you feel comfortable translating this to another language for us?
Yeah, just so we could see what those challenges are.
If this doesn't translate, why not?
Yeah, could they literally write like, this is untranslatable into my language?
Yes. Yeah. Do you all know if Google Forms, I think Google Forms is compatible with that software that reads to you for people who are vision impaired?
I think so.
Okay. I was like, we could put a question on there for that. And then I'm like, how would we get an answer in the case of no,
yeah, I'd have to check.
Yeah.
Because I can't see any reason that it wouldn't, like, I've just learned about how, like, when you're hashtagging things, you should always hashtag each word with a capital letter at the beginning of it.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I was gonna suggest that for the Instagram team actually, but I didn't see anything about hashtagging. If you hashtag and everything has an uppercase, and then it can be read to you without it just being like letter jumble, like word garbage.
What?
Yeah. Okay. Then
Yeah.
I'm going to make that note and also like add that to the document.
Yeah, I recently learned
I
that.
did not know.
Like it can get the word like screen printing, but if I was going screen printing in Kentucky as my full hashtag, it would be like screen printing in Kentucky. Like it does not know what you're trying to tell it, where to put emphasis.
Okay. Okay, cool. So we're definitely going to do this. I'm just going to make notes right here on the document just to make sure we're all on the same page, because then you can see it. So we're going to share through all platforms, create a Google form.
Do we have any key questions we want to ask, or do we just want to be like, here's a box for your suggestions?
Yeah, I do think it's a good idea to see what platform people are accessing this information from, because.
Well, I meant about the actual, like, I meant about the actual mission statement. Because like, so the thing with like asking questions is like, I've written a lot of surveys, and the thing is like, you don't want to ask
you can
questions.
You can create bias in your survey sample. Yeah.
So I'm like, are we looking for, because that's the thing is like, if we do all agree we have a specific question, it is important to ask it. But if we don't think there's like one specific question we need answered about this, then perhaps we should just leave it very open-ended. Like, please provide us your thoughts and feedback.
I think the question should be, do you feel adequately served by this mission statement?
Okay, good.
And there should just be a comments, questions box in general.
Any other comments, questions about
Questions,
it?
concerns?
And then, yeah,
Leave us any revisions, comments, or concerns.
and maybe an open answer. How would you improve this mission statement?
Sure.
And I think that should be something it's not contingent upon answering no to the do you feel adequately by this. I think it should be present regardless.
Yeah.
Because I do know, like, for instance, I do know that Juana had mentioned at one point, and I don't remember if they mentioned this for bylaw or if they mentioned this for, I don't know if they would want this to be as part of the mission statement, but they did mention, making it clear that documentation status does not matter
Right.
in membership. Which is part of why I wanted to say, like, regardless of geography, but then I was like, that's not quite what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so that also can be something we talk more about in our bylaws, but it might be something that we should put in the mission statement. I'm not sure. It depends on, I think, how the membership feels.
Yep.
How would you improve this mission statement? Should I add, how would you improve this mission statement so that it better serves you? Or should it just say,
I
how
would
would
just
you
say
improve?
serve it in general. Like they say, yeah, this serves me great, but I could see a little improvement here. I could see an improvement here.
Okay, cool. That's a good point. Let's keep that general then. Is there anything else we want to ask about the mission statement?
I can't think of anything that isn't too specific.
Yeah.
Right? Like, again, like, I don't want to really like tell them how to respond.
Yeah, I also am wondering, so what are we going to do with this information? Is this a final vote situation? Or are we going to treat this like a draft and then redraft it and send it back out?
I would say this is a draft and we can redraft it. I also think that if you're on Pine, Copper, and Lime next week, that's a really interesting to say. We just put out our first draft of our mission statement. We're really looking for feedback on it.
Yeah,
and that really gets the like member focus up front across the board.
I definitely think this should be considered a draft. I think how many edits it needs is dependent upon the feedback, right? So like if we get a lot of conflicting feedback, it's like, okay, well, maybe we don't just need one rewrite, maybe we need two. So.
Okay. And then how should we limit the response time so that people aren't constantly perhaps potentially getting the wrong link, right? So if we do have a second draft out and they're like, oh, let me put my feedback on it, and instead they're putting their feedback on this original draft, how should we kind of adjust that? Because I think what I can do with Google Forms is have like a time limit.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a
stop.
Do not accept after a certain date.
Okay.
And I mean, that can be pretty clear at the top of the form that, we need your feedback by this date.
Okay. And then I will probably, the latest I will get this out will be Tuesday of next week. So if that is the case, Tuesday of next week is the 27th, which will actually be the same day that we're doing the PCL. But I don't know when that will come out. That's the big problem. I think what I could probably do is ask Miranda when we are talking, like, when is this going to come out? Because there are some pieces of information that might be irrelevant by the time it, shows up.
Like you want to know, because like you want to discuss some things that are currently going on, but will they still be currently going on, when it's aired? Yeah. And I also don't want us to really protract or drag out the voting kind of system. So what if, I'm sorry, what? I said, especially since this is like a first draft, like we can't wait forever.
So what
It
if
can
we have
definitely
it?
be used to antagonize groups.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What if we do it, so the latest that I would get it out is on that Tuesday. What if we have it kind of conclude on the 3rd, election day?
That would be
Or
hilarious.
actually, because it's election day, maybe instead we do like the 4th.
Vote in the national election and then vote on our mission statement.
Exactly. Everybody needs your opinion now. Does that sound good though, doing it on the Wednesday, the 4th as the conclusion?
That I'm looking at it right now. That looks like a good amount of time.
Yeah.
Maybe wait till a Friday or something because that's typically how
Okay.
we plan our weeks.
I was about to say, I'm more of an end of the week kind of person. So like, because that'll give them a little over a week, which is kind of nice.
So like November 6th?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that's what what else are you doing? It's celebrate your Friday.
Yeah, there you go.
Vote.
Well, and also we work in art communities where a very large portion of us don't have to physically be anywhere on Fridays, or we just have faculty meetings. Just.
I love
You
it.
know, yeah. But we don't have a huge time commitment, so we could actually read through a brief statement and be like,
Right.
yes or no, or maybe so.
I'm also I hate giving stuff in the middle of the week just because it's like, what if you're like, oh crap, I'm so busy, I missed it. And
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good point too. Okay, so we will open it up to everybody. It'll be through Google Forms. We're going to share it through all platforms, so I'm really going to have to emphasize that to the other teams. Obviously, YouTube is going to emphasize it anyway because they're going to be uploading this. And typing it up, which thank you. All right, so I'm trying to think if there is anything in particular we need to come back to. We've done our mission statement. Okay, so the next thing is that general timeline, which we've more or less already made. The mission statement was our first priority. The board of directors is our next priority, kind of, sort of, in that we're going to start writing them out in the bylaws. And I'm going to check with Olivia to make sure that she's all right with being an interim director still. Okay.
it seems like the next step is to get a meeting with the bylaws people, and then kind of flush that out.
Okay. Yeah. Let me write that down. And then since you'll be a little bit busier, Chelsea, would it be okay with you if Annie and I, for instance, or even if it was just me, met with bylaw and kind of, it's not ideal, but we kind of walk through a lot of the stuff we talked about today with them and then kind of grow from there with the bylaw sectioning?
Yeah, that'd be great. If you want to keep sending out meetings, like I'll keep responding, but my schedule gets crazy in November. And then after the 23rd or something like that, I basically get my life back again.
Yes.
Got about a month of craziness to go.
Yes. Okay, cool. So that is what we will do. I'm going to try and schedule another meeting with bylaws that will probably happen within the next 2 weeks. So sometime in the beginning of November. I like to try and give 2 weeks of time to, well, yeah, I'm going to do the next 2 weeks just so they have time to respond. Because I think just being like, okay, you have 3 days, tell me now, is really going to diminish the number of people who can attend. But okay, cool. What else? I don't think there's really anything else. I did kind of talk a little bit about us actually going through and sectioning the bylaws, but we already have our first section, which is the board of directors. So I think we can revisit that later because that's going to be a big honking section.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Do y'all have anything else?
I'm good. I also really need to go.
Okay, okay.
I was
All
like,
right.
oh crap, it's art. Like, I was like, I have to be somewhere at 6. I have to cook and be somewhere at 6:30. So I was like, oh, I need to go.
Okay. All right. Well, then I will talk to y'all later. I'm going to send this out immediately to the bylaw and legal team, the link once it's processed, and then I will talk to you all later. Okay.
Good.
Bye.
Bye.